20 earthquakes in 15 hours, right now. Under a volcano in southern Mexico, a volcano that almost nobody was watching until today. And when I dug into the history of this specific volcano, I found something that stopped me cold, because the last time this mountain started shaking like this, months later, it killed nearly 2,000 people and wiped 9 entire villages off the map. This is El Chichón, and this is what is happening underneath it right now. Let me take you through it all. The real data, the real history, the real reason this particular swarm deserves far more attention than it is getting. El Chichón volcano sits in the state of Chiapas, in the dense jungle of southern Mexico, near the town of Pichucalco, not far from the border with Guatemala, and it is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the Western Hemisphere. Not because it erupts often, but because when it erupts, it does something catastrophic, quietly, without warning. And according to Volcano Discovery's real-time earthquake monitoring, just today, April 13th, 2026, a possible earthquake swarm has been confirmed, with 20 earthquakes occurring near and beneath El Chichón during 15 hours. Magnitudes ranging between 2.1 and 2.9. Depths between 2.7 and 3.1 kilometers. That is between roughly 1.7 and 1.9 miles beneath the surface. Shallow, very shallow. And in the past 7 days, the area around El Chichón has recorded 71 earthquakes of up to magnitude 3.1, 71, in 1 week. Now I know some of you are thinking, well, volcanoes shake all the time. And you are right, they do. But let me tell you what makes this specific volcano different, because this is the part that nobody is covering. Further in this video, I will explain exactly what happened in 1982 and why the pattern leading up to that catastrophe looks unsettlingly familiar to what scientists have been watching here for the past year. But first, I need you to understand the scale of what this volcano is capable of, because I promise you, most people have no idea. The 1982 eruption of El Chichón is the largest volcanic disaster in modern Mexican history. Before that eruption, the volcano had been silent for more than 600 years. 600 years. People living in the surrounding communities had no memory of it ever erupting. Many believed it was dormant. Some thought it was extinct. It was heavily forested. It looked like just another jungle hill. And then in the space of 1 week, from March 28th to April 4th, 1982, El Chichón produced 3 Plinian eruptions. 3 in 1 week. The first eruption on March 28th sent an eruptive column 18.5 kilometers into the sky. That is nearly 61,000 feet, well above commercial aircraft altitude. The pyroclastic flows and surges traveled up to 8 kilometers from the crater. That is 5 miles of superheated gas and rock, moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour. 9 villages were completely destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed completely. Between 1,700 and 2,300 people were killed. The landscape was buried under ash up to 40 centimeters deep. That is 16 inches. More than 24,000 square kilometers of countryside were devastated. Coffee plantations, cocoa farms, banana crops, cattle ranches, all gone. And it injected 7 million metric tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. That number, 7 million metric tons, is comparable to the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo, one of the largest eruptions of the 20th century. El Chichón's cloud circled the entire Earth in 3 weeks. It caused measurable global cooling. It affected rainfall as far away as Hong Kong, which recorded its second wettest year since records began in 1884. That is how far the fingerprints of this one eruption reached. And here is what I want you to hold in your mind. Nobody saw it coming. Or rather, the signs were there, and they were missed. Can you give this video a like right now? Share it with someone who cares about this. This is happening in real time, and people need to be paying attention to this. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel get this information out. So let me walk you through exactly what happened in the months before the 1982 eruption, because this history is critical, and it is directly relevant to what we are watching right now. In December 1980 and January 1981, 2 geologists from the Comisión Federal de Electricidad, René Canul and Victor Rocha, were doing fieldwork near the volcano. They heard loud noises. They felt small earthquakes coming from the crater. They were concerned enough to write it specifically in their internal report. They submitted that report in September 1981. And then nothing happened. The report sat in an office. Throughout 1981, local inhabitants felt occasional earthquakes. They reported increased fumarolic activity. They noticed the streams near the volcano seemed warmer than usual. These reports floated up through the regional administration. They never reached the national scientific community in time. By the end of February 1982, the earthquakes were intensifying. On February 26th, shallow seismicity began with a magnitude 2.9 event. By mid-March, there were 10 or more earthquakes per day, at depths of around 5 kilometers, that is 3 miles beneath the surface. On March 27th, the day before the eruption, the earthquakes became much shallower, around 2 kilometers depth, and the frequency jumped to 60 events per day. The following night at 23:15 local time, El Chichón exploded, and nobody was prepared. Scientists only learned of the seismic activity on March 20th. They tried to set up monitoring stations on March 26th. The helicopter was canceled, rescheduled to March 29th. The volcano erupted on March 28th. The scientists were still on the ground, looking up. Later analysis of seismic data recorded by a nearby dam monitoring network revealed that precursory seismicity had actually been detectable as early as January 1980, 2 years before the eruption, 2 years of the Earth shaking under this volcano. And almost nobody was listening. Now, let me tell you what is happening right now, because the comparison is important, but so is the critical difference. El Chichón has been under active monitoring for years since 1982. Today there are seismic sensors, deformation instruments, gas monitoring equipment, and satellite thermal imaging watching this volcano. And what they have been detecting since mid-2025 is a period of sustained hydrothermal unrest. According to a comprehensive report from the Watchers published in February 2026, and based on data from the National Autonomous University of Mexico's Institute of Geophysics and other national and academic monitoring institutions, hydrothermal unrest at El Chichón has been ongoing since mid-2025. It is characterized by elevated seismicity, physical, and chemical changes within the summit crater lake and persistent gas emissions. The monitoring institutions report that the current activity shows no indicators of magma migration toward the surface. The Mexico Volcanic Alert System currently has El Chichón at Semáforo Volcánico Amarillo, Phase 1 to 2, that is yellow alert, elevated but non-eruptive activity. So what does this all mean? Let me break it down carefully. The crater of El Chichón contains a lake, created by the 1982 eruption. It is approximately 1 kilometer, that is 0.62 miles in diameter, and roughly 200 meters or 656 feet deep. The water is sulfur-rich, acidic, and it reaches temperatures close to 100 degrees Celsius, close to boiling, right at the surface. The lake sits directly above one of the most active hydrothermal systems in Mexico, hot water under enormous pressure, moving through fractured rock, along fault systems. Specifically the Catedral Chichón Fault and the San Juan Fault, which cross directly beneath the crater, and when that pressurized hydrothermal fluid moves, it causes earthquakes. That is what the current swarm most likely represents. Fluid movement, pressurization within the hydrothermal system, shallow earthquakes between 2.7 and 3.1 kilometers depth, directly beneath and around the volcanic edifice. Now here's what I found when I went deeper into the science. Because there are two things you need to know about the seismicity at El Chichón. The first is that the 1982 eruption was preceded by months of shallow seismicity at exactly this kind of depth, between 2 and 8 kilometers. And the lead study on the 1982 eruption's precursory seismicity, published in the Bulletin of Volcanology and conducted by Jimenez et al., found that large quantities of fluids, hydrothermal fluids, water, and possibly magma were involved in the physical processes that generated that pre-eruptive shaking. Fluid-driven shallow seismicity at the same depths we are seeing now. That fact does not mean an eruption is coming. Scientists are explicitly saying current conditions do not indicate imminent eruption. No magma ascent signals have been detected, but it does mean that the same fundamental geological mechanism is active right now as was active before the last catastrophe, and that is worth knowing. The second thing is about the broader seismic context. El Chichón sits in one of the most tectonically complex zones in Mexico. It is located where the North American plate, the Cocos plate, and the Caribbean plate all interact. The Cocos plate is actively subducting beneath the North American plate here, diving downward at an angle. And that subduction process, that slow grinding collision, supplies fluids into the overlying crust. Water-rich minerals carried down by the subducting plate release their fluids as they heat up. Those fluids rise. They feed the hydrothermal system beneath El Chichón. They pressurize the rock. And when a large tectonic earthquake strikes in the region, even a distant one, it can shake the entire fluid system. We know this happened in September 2017 when an 8.2 magnitude earthquake struck offshore Chiapas. Within days, seismicity at El Chichón increased sharply. It stayed elevated for 5 weeks. Later research found those quakes were associated with the hydrothermal system, driven by fluid redistribution triggered by the distant large earthquake. El Chichón's hydrothermal system is sensitive. It responds to disturbances. It has not returned fully to quiet since 2017. Seismicity remained elevated as of September 2025, months before the current swarm began building. And now we have 71 earthquakes in 1 week, with 20 alone in a 15-hour window today. That is not a quiet volcano, but there is something else here I need you to understand. Something about what makes El Chichón different from almost any other volcano on Earth. Because this matters for what a future eruption here would mean. Not just locally, but globally. The 1982 eruption was special in one very specific way. El Chichón's magma is unusually rich in sulfur. It contains a mineral called anhydrite, which is calcium sulfate. Most volcanoes produce lava that has very little sulfur, but El Chichón's magma has massive concentrations of it, and when that sulfur-rich magma erupts explosively and reaches the stratosphere, it forms a sulfur dioxide cloud, a cloud that spreads around the entire planet. That becomes sulfate aerosols, particles that reflect incoming sunlight, and that cool the Earth. In 1982, those aerosols caused a measurable drop in global temperatures, a cooling effect detectable across the entire northern hemisphere for over a year. And here is the number that still stops me when I think about it. The sulfur dioxide injection from the 1982 El Chichón eruption, 7 million metric tons, was comparable to Mount Pinatubo in 1991. Pinatubo caused 0.5 degrees Celsius of global cooling for nearly 2 years. The 1991 Mount Pinatubo eruption is one of the most well-documented cases of volcanic climate forcing in modern science, and El Chichón, despite being less widely known, was in the same sulfur league. The next eruption from El Chichón, when it comes in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, will carry that same sulfur signature. Because the magma beneath this volcano is the same composition it has always been. High sulfur, high anhydrite, high climate impact potential. Now, let me tell you about the current status precisely, because I want to be very clear about the difference between watching carefully and sounding false alarms. Monitoring institutions currently report no evidence of magma ascent toward the surface. The current earthquakes are shallow, consistent with hydrothermal fluid movement, not magmatic intrusion. Mexico's volcanic alert system is at yellow, not red. There is no imminent eruption threat being declared by any agency. Access to the crater interior has been restricted to accredited researchers because of hazardous conditions, which was implemented after a joint assessment in August 2025. Civil protection authorities in Chiapas have been developing an updated emergency civil protection program for El Chichón, which had last been revised in 2021. That update was triggered by the ongoing unrest. This is the context of measured concern, not panic. But here's what I want to say about that. In 1982, there was also no imminent eruption warning declared, because nobody was looking closely enough, because there was no systematic monitoring baseline. Because the signal that now, with decades of hindsight, looks like a clear precursory sequence, was invisible to the people who should have been watching. Today the monitoring exists. The seismic network is in place. UNAM's Institute of Geophysics is watching. The Mexican authorities are updating the civil protection plan. Researchers have restricted access to the crater. All of that is different from 1982. and it matters. But the volcano itself is the same. The geology is the same. The hydrothermal system is the same. The sulfur-rich magma sitting deep beneath the surface is the same. And the question of what happens if that system tips from hydrothermal unrest into something deeper, well, that question is very much alive. So what should we watch next? This is what I would be tracking very closely. The depth of the earthquakes. The current swarm is centered between 2.7 and 3.1 kilometers. If those depths start decreasing, migrating upward toward 1 or 2 kilometers or shallower, that is one of the most important warning signs geologists look for. It can indicate fluid or magma moving toward the surface. In the weeks before the 1982 eruption, the earthquakes shallowed dramatically on March 27th. From 5 kilometers to about 2 kilometers, that transition happened in one day, and by the next night, El Chichón was erupting. So the depth trend matters enormously. The second thing to watch is the chemistry of the crater lake. The lake is essentially a giant geochemical sensor sitting directly above the hydrothermal system. When heat and gas input from below increases, the lake temperature rises, the sulfur content increases, the pH drops, becoming more acidic. These changes can precede eruptive activity. And according to the February 2026 monitoring report, recent changes in solute flux patterns have already been detected in the crater lake over the past year. That is a change from background. The third thing to watch is whether the volcanic alert level changes from yellow toward orange or red. Right now, it is yellow phase 1 to 2. If UNAM or the Mexican Civil Protection Authorities raise that level, that means they have detected something that warrants a stronger response. And the fourth thing, the most important, is whether SO2 emissions above the volcano increase significantly. A rise in sulfur dioxide coming from the crater, especially from the main vent, can indicate that magma is degassing at depth. That is one of the clearest signals that the system has transitioned from purely hydrothermal to something involving fresh magma. Right now, the evidence points to hydrothermal processes, but El Chichón's history, its geology, and the fact that it has been shaking persistently for nearly a year mean this is a volcano that deserves eyes on it. Serious, careful, informed eyes. And this is what this channel is here for. I said at the beginning that this eruption in 1982 surprised almost everyone. It did not have to. The signs were there. They were felt by people, reported by geologists in the field, written in internal reports, and filed away. There is no filing away now. The monitoring exists. The science exists. The understanding of what to look for exists. El Chichón is currently rated at yellow alert. Hydrothermal unrest. No magmatic intrusion detected, no imminent eruption, but 20 earthquakes in 15 hours today, 71 in the past week, under a volcano with a known recurrence interval for major eruptions averaging around 300 years, and 44 years since the last one. This is what watching carefully looks like. I will be following every update from UNAM, from Mexico's Civil Protection Authorities, and from the global volcanic monitoring networks. The moment something changes here, I will be covering it immediately. If you want to see the other volcanic stories I have been following across the world this month, they are all linked in the end screen. If you want to support this channel, you know where to find me. Stay safe, guys. Be aware. Bye-bye.